Where is supplement science going to go in the next 5 to 10 years? And what part of that are you most focused on right now?
Lifespan to health span. When I'm 80 years old, I want to play tennis and go golfing. You're moving away from the mindset of quality being connected to, quote, avoiding failure, but quality being connected to delivering integrity. Right?
Welcome to Inside the Formula, a Supco original series where we go behind the science of supplements that have earned the Tested by Supco certification. Each episode, I sit down with the formulators, chemists, and scientists behind these products to find out what it actually takes to make a supplement that works.
I'm Jordan Glenn, head of science at Supco. My guest today is Travis Borchardt. Travis has over 25 years of leadership experience in the dietary supplement industry, setting benchmarks for quality and compliance. He is highly skilled in FDA regulations, GMPs, labeling, and advertising law, with scientific affairs and extensive expertise in ingredient supply chains and product development. Travis has established a world-class chemistry and microbiological testing laboratory and appeared on PBS Frontline. He also serves on the executive committee of the Council for Responsible Nutrition. Before we begin, an important reminder. Tested by Supco is an independent certification program that Supco offers as part of its business model. Brands featured in this series have paid fees to have their products analyzed by the tested program, which tests the products that consumers actually buy to verify their active ingredient claims. Test results are published transparently, pass or fail, and cannot be influenced. Today's episode includes a brand partner. And now, my conversation with Travis Borchardt. Welcome. All right, Travis, welcome. Glad to have you here today.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Jordan.
And remember, where are you located again?
I'm located in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Green Bay. Are you guys, I don't know weather in Green Bay. Are you guys warm these days? We are finally getting warm here in Boston. Where are you guys at?
Yeah, it's been a wet, cold spring. We joke around here that summer usually falls on a weekend, right? So you have to enjoy it when it's here. But yeah, no, it's starting to warm up. I think today we're in mid 50s and sun, so it feels good.
God, I feel like we're in the same boat. Have you been in Green Bay your entire time that you've been with Integrative?
Yes.
Man,
So I started actually with enzymatic therapy, right? Founded by Terry Lemeron back in I think it was early 80s at that time. And then through various sort of mergers and acquisitions over time, right? Integrated became sort of affiliated with enzymatic and became one. But yeah, that has all happened in Green Bay.
Man, and so you've been with Integrative Therapeutics 27 years now. I'm
Yeah.
very curious to know kind of like what pulled you in and what it's been like to grow up alongside the supplement industry.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say back when I interviewed for my role of packaging coordinator, QA packaging coordinator back in 1999, what really drew me to this industry at that time was what I would say in one word is potential, right? The potential to be really, centered on a cause revolving around improving patient health and the quality of life of the consumers using these cool ingredients like botanicals and enzymes and probiotics and many things at that time that I'd never have even heard of, right? So sort of being at the cutting edge of this emerging science and category directed at patient preventative health, rather than sort of fixing problems after they happen, was just super curious to me. So that potential really lit a fire inside me. Like, hey, I really need to be involved in this going forward.
And so Integrative Therapeutics was, you talk about like patients. It was founded by practitioners who were actually using these products in patient care. How did that origin story kind of shape how you all formulate today on your side?
Yeah, no, that's another great question. Yeah, so going back to I would say early as the mid 1970s, right? We had practitioner founders that um, were really creating formulas based on patient needs that were not being served at the time. Um, and one of those naturopathic doctors, Corey Resnick, is still on our scientific advisory board today, right? And he was formulating products back in the mid 80s and still has a practice. And um, it's really what I would call this concept of what we call the trust triangle, right? And it's sort of this triangle of where, hey, the practitioner, right, trusts the integrity of the brand. The patient, right, is trusting that the practitioner, right, is providing clinical guidance and reference to products that are going to impact their health, right? And then the patient, right, is trusting that, right, that product is going to actually do something positively for them, right? So everything we do from a formula perspective really has to be in line with that trust triangle that really, again, stems back to our founders' vision on the healthcare practitioner side of things in regards to how these products impact patients' health.
And so walk me through how a new product comes to life. So when you guys start with a new product, from what I understand, you build what you call a charter first. Walk me through that process.
Yeah, that's right. So, right, a charter is really, hey, the name of the document, right? That captures the opportunity, right? And when I say opportunity, we're looking at, hey, what are the patient and practitioner needs that need to be met, um, that sort of align with a gap that we have in our current portfolio, right? So then we better define the opportunity, right? Whether it's, hey, the concept itself, along with potential positioning and claims, and maybe potential ways in, right? All these are on the document. And then that charter, right, will also go into some detail about the competitive landscape. Hey, what else is out there? How might we differentiate ourselves from the competition, but also, again, meet the needs of the consumer and the patient. And looking at things like market size and potential opportunities and risks, right, being in that particular need state or categories of product. Looking at resources required to execute in terms of, hey, from a complexity perspective, is this project going to take a lot of resources, or is it fairly straightforward to execute? Desired launch timing, size of the prize, et cetera. So all of that, right, gets wrapped into this charter and then goes to, our innovation steering committee for review and approval. And if it gets approved, it goes into our formal stage gate process, right, for execution.
And when you're starting to build these products, so that's a lot just to get one started, and then you got to think
That's right.
about the level of quality that goes in the product that you guys are putting together too. And I've personally heard you describe quality as a quote unquote three-legged stool. What do those legs mean, and where do these legs potentially break down?
Yeah, yes. So the three legs, right, boil down to facility, processes, and people, right? And when I say facility, I'm truly, making reference not only the buildings, but the equipment, right, that's being used to manufacture these products. Right, and that facility and that equipment really needs to be designed to deliver things like dose consistency, right, from tablet to tablet, or capsule to capsule, sachet to sachet. So things like consistency and mixing and uniformity and blending and the complexity of combining, sometimes with these formulas, you're looking at 40 to 50 actives, right, of various different particle sizes and some at micro quantities. So how do you ensure that all of that stuff mixes together uniformly, right? And you're delivering in each capsule that, in some cases, a microgram of biotin or whatever it might be, right? Um, and that really comes down to knowing what you need from an equipment perspective, and facility perspective, and things like, preventing cross contamination and adequate dust controls, right? And um, having disparate rooms for separate operations, right, to prevent that cross contamination. So, facility is so important, right, and being one of those legs on the stool. The second leg, right, being processes. Um, when I first started back in '99, there was a QA supervisor at the time that liked to say, hey, it takes pounds of paper to prove performance, right? And all of that paper, right, she was referencing was written standard operating procedures, right, pertaining to process. Now we've come a long way with technology, right, and digitizing much of that. But right, it's still right written processes, whether it's in paper or digitized, right, still need to exist for SOPs covering everything from ingredient sourcing to supplier qualification to formulation to claim substantiation to spec writing, manufacturing, testing, distribution, right? All of that on the process side, right, is so important. Um, and and we all also had said at that time, I think, hey, if it wasn't written or if it's not written, it didn't happen, right? So that's sort of documenting the process. And then the third leg, right, people, which I think is the most important leg on that stool. You have to have people that are qualified, that are appropriately trained, right, have the right combination of education and experience. But I think most importantly, that they're truly passionate about, right, delivering quality and integrity, right, in the products that are in the hands and getting into the hands of the consumer, and really passionate about patient outcomes, right? Um, those intangibles are just so important, and when folks are passionate about quality, they really take pride, right, in their work, and it's not sort of this, it's not this, hey, just meeting regulations, right? It's delivering quality, integrity of the product.
And so you ended there with team, and I am aware that your team on average has been around between 12 and 13 years per person, which is an incredible
hmm
tenure when you think about a large group of people. How do you guys build a culture like that where people want to stay around and want to stay involved in these processes for so long?
Yeah, no, that's an important question, and it's one that I believe many companies struggle with. Right, is that quality culture, and it has to start with ownership and leadership. Right, they really need to prioritize quality and all that's done, and it's, hey, investments that are made, right, in people and equipment and processes, and it's not just, what we do, but it has to be ingrained into, quote, who we are. um, right, it's embedded into our daily operations, connected to a clear purpose, right, which is protecting patient health and trust. um, right, so it's this sort of concept or paradigm shift, I would call it, where you're moving away from the mindset of quality being connected to, quote, avoiding failure, but quality being connected to delivering integrity, right? Um, and I would say, hey, it takes time, right? And over time, we've been doing this for, over 50 years. And over time, it just created this, what I would call stable, transparent, accountable environment, right, where employees truly value quality because, right, in the end, it reduces chaos, and it allows them to do their jobs with confidence and pride.
And I love that. And one of the words you said there was transparency, which I think is becoming more and more important in the supplement
hmm
world. And we think about that a lot with regard to another buzzword, which is third party testing. And now the rigor when it comes to third party testing can vary wildly. But
hmm
what does independent verification actually mean to integrative therapeutics? And why did you ultimately decide to go down the route of the tested by SUPCO certification?
Yeah, love this topic. Third party testing, right? Definitely a buzzword, and we hear a lot, right, from both our internal folks and external, right, practitioners, patients, consumers, right, on, hey, is this product third party tested? Um, and I think you framed it right, which is, hey, verified versus tested, right? Testing is, one I would say piece, maybe even you could argue a small piece of complete verification, right, of a product. And third party testing in particular, right? I'd love to say that, hey, every third party lab we've used has formulation specific expertise, right, as it pertains to our product, and all of their methods are validated, fit for purpose, right, based on our dose form and matrix and concentration of active. But, all of that takes a lot of extra effort and work to get to that point on your specific matrix and product. Um, so, right, just because you're doing it third party doesn't mean, from a testing perspective, doesn't mean that it's, quote, being done correct. Now, hey, third-party test labs play a very important role in our industry, and many of them work very hard, right, at engaging with their customers to make sure that right methods are being used. Um, but speaking from experience, right, I know that doesn't happen all the time, and it can be a struggle. And then the last thing I'll say about third-party labs before commenting on the subco tested by subco verification. I would say third-party testing programs, for the most part, focus on verifying what must be or what should be in the product, right? I.e., okay, the label claims this amount of vitamin C and that amount of magnesium, et cetera, right? So, hey, are those levels truly present when I test? But most of them don't do a great job of focusing on identifying or verifying on what shouldn't be present, and and some of that from an example perspective. Hey, synthetic curcuminoids in turmeric, right? So if you look at even monograph, like a United States Pharmacopoeia monograph, right, doesn't talk about synthetic curcuminoids in turmeric. So right, having knowledge of supply chain and potential adulterants and what is out there, right, from a potential adulteration perspective, all that becomes critical in your testing program. So, working with labs that are, not just quote checking boxes, but truly trying to understand the risks, right, based on, hey, not what should only quote be there based on the label, but what shouldn't be there, right, based on the potential for adulteration. So anyhow, I'll get off my third-party tested soapbox and transition to verified by subco. What I really love about the tested by subco, right, is it builds in more robust verification than just quote testing. And testing is a component, right, and right, an important component. But I love that, hey, looking at manufacturing standards, certifications, ingredient attributes, clinical studies, right? Are these ingredients studied for the effect, right, claimed in marketing materials and on the label? And then transparency, right? Looking at a company's transparency. Hey, do they have testing approaches and C of A's disclosed on their websites? Right, and giving quote credit for even internal testing that's being done, right, as a critical part of the quality process, right? We have an ISO accredited testing lab here on site, right, and we've taken the position that, hey, we're not going to outsource a major piece of our quality program, i.e., testing. We want to be responsible for quality as, hey, it's our name on the label, right, and it's our brand. So we need to have that level of expertise. But yeah, love the tested by subco, more robust verification, right, that builds in those other elements in addition to testing. I think can just give the consumer and patient more trust, right, around these brands.
That's great. And what I think, what's interesting is when you guys put products in market, you're very confident that they're going to pass these third-party bars before they go there because you have such internal rigor going on. But I want to talk about a time when maybe a product didn't pass that bar, or maybe you had to significantly reformulate something because a product wasn't quite doing what you hoped it to do.
Yeah, no, but right, it happens. I'd love to say that, hey, everything goes perfectly all the time. But right, working in the world of quality, another saying is, hey, every day's a heart attack, right? And sometimes that can be true. Some days. But yeah, I think for the most part, I would say we've been fortunate, and some of that goes back to, hey, being in this industry for so long with such high quality standards, right? We have, long-standing, rich supplier relationships, right? Where, hey, suppliers know us, we know them. So the number of surprises that come forward are lessened. I would say where we start to, encounter potential challenges is more on the emerging ingredient, newer sort of emerging suppliers and emerging ingredient categories. And it's not that they're willfully, doing something incorrectly. It's more of, hey, we're both sort of learning the category together, right? And it could be things as easy as, okay, well, hey, our test method is different than theirs. We got to, greatly different results. So we can't launch this product, right, using this ingredient until we're aligned on test methods and we're both producing the same outcome, right? Because until then, we don't know which one is right? We're getting two greatly different results on, hey, it could be an active or a contaminant or a microbe, it didn't, again, depending on the situation. And we've run into some of all of that over the years. And then, the other thing that really comes up, I would say, in emerging sort of new scenarios, and this is probably more in the new emerging dose form scenario. I think the line between supplements and food continues to blur, which just means, hey, instead of capsules and tablets, right, we're seeing dietary ingredients get into many different dose forms, right, from bars to liquids to drinks to sprays, to patches, right, which one could argue are not compliant dietary supplements. Um, but the concern here is stability, right? Stability, one of the concerns, right? Stability of the actives. And here too is another one where, hey, we've delayed launches because we just don't have enough data, right, to verify that the stability of those actives in this particular matrix and form and package, right, are not meeting shelf life standards. We typically like to go to market with at least 18 months of shelf life. And if you can't get there in one of those forms, right, where, hey, right, the milk in your fridge doesn't have an 18-month shelf life, right, you use that up in a few days. But right, hey, when you start to put dietary ingredients in more food-like forms, right, the stability challenge is one that tends to rise up. So yeah, I probably didn't answer your question in regards to, hey, give me a specific example, but I would say we've had things happen in each of those categories over the years, and um, more so, I would say on the emerging sort of new things that we haven't touched before. Um, and I would say, hey, the frequency perhaps will even increase, right, as some of these dose forms become more food-like.
And I think that's great. But I think it's also, and it's honest and humbling, right? To say like, hey, we're trying these new things. They don't always work out the way we want them to work out. And instead of just pushing them to market and hoping for the best, you guys are really holding them back, trying to figure out the rigor, trying to figure out the stability. And that, it reminds me of something that we said a little bit earlier where, your scientific affairs team is lovingly sometimes monikered as skeptical affairs, and perhaps, rightfully so in these regards. And so where does the science really need to be before you'll actually put a claim on a label and push it to market?
Yes, great question. The skeptical affairs team, as they're sometimes called, right? I think stems today from the fact that ingredient suppliers are becoming very good marketers, right? And our marketing people, right, also very good at grabbing on to some of those very impressive claims and positioning statements, right, on the ingredient side. Um, and it's scientific affairs job to really dive in and understand, hey, is the science, right, as good as the marketing? And that, takes skill in evaluating the totality of the scientific evidence. And that can vary greatly, right, depending on the type of ingredient. Some of the complexity there too. Vitamin C, right? Hey, it's a single entity, one compound, tons of data, right, to comb through to evaluate the totality of the evidence. But you compare that to something like, let's say, an ashwagandha root extract, where now it's like, okay, well, it's ashwagandha root extract, but what is it really in terms of its chemical makeup? And that largely depends on, okay, well, what plant part was extracted? What extraction solvent was used? What was the process? All of that will then change the chemical profile, right, of that extract. And okay, well, I have a clinical study here that says ashwagandha extract was studied for reduction of cortisol or reduction of stress. Um, but the clinical study doesn't tell me, what the withanolide fingerprint looked like, right? And so, how do I know the ashwagandha I'm buying is right consistent with the study? So anyway, right, scientific affairs has the responsibility of right again evaluating the totality of elements as it's relevant to what it is we intend to use in our product. And then the quality of the evidence, right, is another big piece. Right, and some of this is really related to the claim or intended claim to be made. So as the consequence of the claim being false increases, right, the quality and totality or the amount of the evidence needs to increase also, right? And then I would say the same if what's the benefit if the claim is true? If that rises up to a high level, well then the level of substantiation, the quality of that evidence, the totality of that evidence has to be clearer and more substantial, right? So that's you're playing with sort of those two levers, totality and quality, and then relevance, um, and using our corporate risk SOP guidelines, right, to evaluate these studies and claims together.
And I like that note on especially the quality of the evidence. I think a lot of times we see
Mhm.
clickbait headlines that'll see 10 people in a pilot study and we think it cures cancer, but that's very different than seeing, 30 plus studies in a meta-analysis and really seeing how that data are playing out over time. And so
Yeah.
Integrative Therapeutics has been around 50 years. You've been there 27. You've seen the science really change over the years. Where is supplement science going to go in the next 5 to 10 years? And what part of that are you most focused on right now?
Yes, I would say in the next 5 to 10 years, there's two or three areas that the science will really be focused on. One for us is really this concept of lifespan to health span, right? Is one way to frame it. Healthy aging, longevity, or right another additional ways to frame it. But I think right the ability to measure or even score how well I'm aging, right, is something that a lot of folks are really, really interested in. And there's some of this out in the public domain already, but I would say the science to back it is really in an emerging state. Um, but right, folks are really looking to not only live longer, but to be, to have the quality of those years be right high. So when I'm 80 years old, I want to play tennis and go golfing and right and all that good stuff. How do I get there, and how do I along the way sort of keep score right around how well I'm doing. Um, so I think there's sort of this combination of, personalized, um, not only nutrition and dietary supplements, but right, personalized lifestyle sort of recommendations and guidance that combine with supplementation, and then the ability to really, um, sort of keep score along the way on how I'm aging is something that we're super super interested in. So that's one. Another one that I really love is biotics beyond digestion, right? So obviously probiotics, huge category, has done really, really well in recent years. I think there's a lot of emerging science, even still on probiotics, but now that right, this whole new category of postbiotics is something that we're super interested in. Right, and some of that is, hey, much easier to work with, right? Because now you're not having to keep these organisms alive, right, throughout the shelf life of the product, right? It's sort of this combination of the cellular material with metabolites, right, that the organisms produce that are delivering a health benefit to the consumer, um, and doing it in a very targeted way, right, and addressing health beyond just your sort of your typical digestive health and or immune symptoms. So super interested there. I think there's a lot of science starting to emerge, and I think a lot of opportunity in that space. And then the last one I would just mention is, women's health at all life stages is one that we continue to be um, really interested in. But we think there's like a gap, in the science there, and high demand for solutions, right, ranging from hormone balance to sleep to stress to perimenopause to right energy conversations to cognition to right muscle maintenance um and all of those related to hey where a woman is at in their life stage, right, and how do you positively influence those need states based on where they're at in those life stages. um and I think a lot of science will be focused there in the coming years.
I think that's great. Now, as we come to the end of our conversation here, I want to
Mhm.
know, for the practitioners, for the patients who rely on integrative therapeutics on a daily basis, what should they understand about what went into really making these products? What's the thing that never makes it on the label that you want them to know?
Yes, I think some of it is right what we talked about, right? And I would boil it back down to this facility, people, and processes, right? And on the facility front, right, we have a 450,000 square foot facility dedicated to manufacturing and distributing these products. Um, world class facilities, Pharma-Grade, and if you don't actually get to see them, I get to see them every day when I come to work, right? But hey, that's not something we put on the label. But anyone and everyone that comes through our facilities, right? I think it's super eye opening, right? To actually see with your own eyes the level of commitment and investment to making these products the right way. So that's one of the things we're striving to do is, well, hey, how do we bring people, patients, consumers, practitioners, right, from the outside in, right, in today's digital world. We all need to get better at that. Um, and we do invite folks, right? We have sort of an open door policy. Hey, come visit. We'll show you our facility. And then processes, right? Again, thousands of written SOPs, specs, master manufacturing records, test methods. Um, that stuff doesn't make it on the label, but right, you have to have it, right, to ensure that each product is made consistently, and meeting our expectations and standards, right? That documentation is needed. And then on the people front, on my team, I think it's approaching 80, right, people now focused solely on quality and compliance, right? And these are chemists, microbiologists, process engineers, PhD level nutritionists, right? These are folks that, again, you need to have on staff to do this the right way and deliver products that the patient are going to benefit from. But right, again, it's those three things, right? Facility, people, processes. Um, I wish all that could go on the label.
I think that's well said, Travis. I think, and my last question for you, I
Mhm.
want to know personally, what is one supplement that you can't live without, and one supplement flying under the radar that you wish more people knew about?
Yes. So I think finally getting to be springtime here in the Midwest. And one of the products on the integrative side that I cannot live without this time of year is a product called All Clear. And it's ALLQLEAR. Um, and it's a combination of alpha glycosyl isoquercetin and quail egg. And it's a product that really provides like stabilization of mast cells immune cells in the body, right, that are responsible for release of histamine and tryptase. Um, so for seasonal, right, issues, it's so effective. And like I said, I absolutely cannot live without it this time of year, and it's just a great product. Um, and then the other one in regards to under the radar, um, for me, from a men's health perspective, and I think men's health is starting to get a little bit more play in recent months. Um, as a need that is an opportunity for our industry. And as I mentioned earlier, right, as I age, and my daughter is a teenage tennis player, and it's harder and harder for me to keep up, right? And you know, and again, getting back to things we measure, testosterone is one of those things, right, that can be easily measured now. And hey, as I age, I know that's on the decline. And so one of the products that I really reach for on the integrative side in recent years has been a product just called Testosterone Formula. It's a combination of essential nutrients, botanical extracts, such as ashwagandha, ginseng, tribulus, right? But for supporting healthy testosterone levels. And it's something that's really been effective for me. Um, but yeah, I think in general, I think that's also a category of opportunity in our industry.
I love it. Facility, process, people deeply dedicated to quality, producing pharmaceutical level supplements for over 25 years. Travis Borchardt, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome, Jordan. Thank you for having me.